My name is Matthew Menendez with White Plume. I'm going to be leading the webinar this afternoon. And this webinar is really designed for people who have been to another White Plume ICD-10 webinar today. This is going to be much more focused on our electronic Superbill product. We're going to talk a lot about AccelaCAPTURE, what it is, how it works, just to try to give you enough information to start to understand, is that something that would be helpful for your practice? So our goals are, I'm going to give you some background information on ICD-10, what some of the problems are that we're trying to solve with this application, and then I'm going to really jump in and we'll take a look at the application itself. All right, so we're going to go through and we'll look at the appointment screen, which is kind of your home screen within the application. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about that. And then we'll go through and do use the electronic Superbill for Encounter ICD-9. And then we'll turn around and use the Encounter, the Superbill to use that again in ICD-10 so that you can see what that looks like today and what that will look like after the ICD-10 conversion date of October 1st. Many of you will probably want to use ICD-10, use AccelaCAPTURE as a standalone application rather than having that interfaced. It is less expensive that way. It would be my recommendation. That's the best way to start. So I'll go through the encounter charge data report that shows you at the end of the day, once we've captured all of this information, how do we get that out and how do we get that into our billing system so we can send out our claims. Again, I will leave time for questions and answers at the end. So if you haven't found the question section within the GoToWebinar control panel, take a minute and go ahead and do that now. Now, if you'll remember, when we were talking about ICD-10, when we looked at some of the earlier webinars, we wanted to encourage everybody, don't make the mistakes a lot of other practices make. Don't make the assumption that ICD-10 is just a coding project, because it's much more than that. It's not just about going to coding certification classes, going to coding boot camps, and assuming that the providers, that the clinical staff won't have to deal with ICD-10. Yes, ICD-10 is a big change for coders, but it impacts much more than that. Another mistake we see practices make is the wrong assumption that ICD-10 is just an IT upgrade, meaning you've got to get on the right versions of the right software applications. But software doesn't itself make a good process, make a good workflow. The users have to be able to use it well. They have to be trained well, and it's got to be the right fit for your practice, right fit for your workflow. And that's why we encourage you to dig deep, to look at how this would work for your practice so that you can understand that. And ICD-10 has to be viewed as a strategic initiative because of what's at stake. It's not like a lot of the other government programs, like e-prescribing or PQRS or meaningful use, right? All of those programs were optional. They were all Medicare or Medicaid only. They had an incentive payment. ICD-10 is none of those things. ICD-10 is mandatory, one-day change for all of your carriers. 100% of cash flow is at risk. There is no carrot. It is all stick. And what you want to focus on, and what we're trying to do with AccelaCAPTURE, is protect your doctor's time, protect your doctor's productivity, and at the same time, make sure that we protect your revenue cycle efficiency as well. You've got to get the claims out the door, and you've got to use the right codes. Remember, we talked about how using those unspecified codes are risky from a reimbursement standpoint. We've got to give your billing team the right data that they need the first time so we don't have that back and forth communication issue between the coding staff and the providers. We talked about before in the previous webinars, we talked about physician productivity, what the impact was when they looked at Canada's transition to ICD-10. It was 10 to 20%. It was that back and forth between the doctors and the coders that was taking providers 45 to 90 minutes per doctor per day. We don't have that kind of time. Where do your doctors find that time in their day? That's what we want to protect against. That's the #1 goal of what we're doing with AccelaCAPTURE. But at the same time, making sure the coders, the billers, get the right data that they need the first time to protect their productivity, to make sure that claims go out the door correctly the very first time. That's what we're trying to protect against. And if you'll also remember, one of the things that we looked at was the status quo is unacceptable. The paper superbill, the paper encounter form that you're probably using today, easily fits 200, 300 diagnosis codes on it. But when we take those codes and we convert them into ICD-10, you cannot fit 1,200, 1,600, 6,000 codes on a piece of paper. It won't work. And remember, we broke down that conversion analysis into 3 risk categories. I'm going to use those risk categories when we get into the demo to talk about low-risk codes. Those are the easy ones that everybody likes. 1 code in ICD-9, 1 code in ICD-10. The application can convert that automatically for you. But when you get into the moderate risk or high risk codes, those are the ones that are going to be more difficult. Those are the ones where there are multiple options in ICD-10, between 2 and 10 choices for the moderate risk ICD-9 codes, and 11 or more choices for the high risk ICD-9 codes. I'll show you examples of each of those. But that's why the paper encounter form won't work. There's not enough space, and it's not a practical solution to try to do what the American Academy of Family Practice recommended, which was take what is today a 2-page document and turn that into an 8-page superbill in ICD-10. That's bad for your providers, and it's bad for your revenue cycle. So that's the problem that we're trying to solve. And we want to do that in a way that fits into your workflow, that requires very little physician training. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you AccelaCAPTURE. It's a web-based application. So there's no software that you have to install. Think of it like online banking. Anywhere that you have a web browser, as long as you know your URL and your password, you can gain access securely to the application. So that means you can use this on desktops and laptops. You can use it on PCs and Macs. You can use it on tablets. Again, whether they're an iPad or an Android or even a Windows Surface tablet. I would not recommend going with anything smaller than an iPad. From a screen size perspective, you start to get into the iPad mini or into the phones, even some of the larger phones like the 6 Plus. The screen size is just too small to try to adequately replicate an 8.5 by 11-inch piece of paper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and log in. I'm going to type in my username and put in my password. And what you'll see when I log in, my home screen within the application is my appointment selection screen. And you can see I've got some selections made at the top. I'm logged in as Dr. Tony Carlton. I'm seeing all of my patients for today that are at the Sharondale location. That can be configured on a user-by-user basis. You may have some users who need access to all of the providers. You may have some users who only work with 2 providers in the practice or at only one specific location. I've got my appointment list sorted by appointment time because I think that makes the most sense to me. But a lot of people will do that alphabetically by last name, for example. You've got a lot of flexibility there. But this is kind of my home screen. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on a patient's name when I'm ready to see that patient. I'll click on Lightning McQueen, and up comes that patient's electronic superbill. You'll see the header information at the top has the patient's name and the doctor and the location and the insurance and the date of birth, demographic information. And then at the bottom, you'll see the customized superbill. You'll see 3 tabs for procedure codes, diagnosis codes, and rank and link. I'll walk through those with you. We're starting on the procedure tab, and again, you see different sections of code. You see the code and the description. We custom design each of these to try to make it look as similar as possible to the paper Superbill that you're using today. And the reason for that is twofold. Number one, it minimizes the change to the provider. They know how to mark their paper Superbill. They know how to mark their electronic Superbill. But number two is it shortens the training time for how they have to use this. They know where all the codes are. They're not spending any time looking for codes. They know where those are on the form. So let me go through and do a visit in ICD-9, and then we'll turn around and do the exact same thing in ICD-10. If I've got a level 3 office visit and a cholesterol test, and maybe I flip over to the back side, and I've got my diagnosis codes, right? And I can click on cough, and then we'll scroll down a little bit and click on carpal tunnel syndrome. And then we'll go a little bit further and do CHF, congestive heart failure. Click, click, click. You can see that's pretty simple. If I scroll back up and go to the rank and link tab, you'll see a summary of everything that's selected. By default, whatever diagnosis I click on first will be my primary diagnosis. Whatever diagnosis I click on second will be my secondary diagnosis. If I click on third will be my tertiary diagnosis. But I can certainly change that. If I want to move heart failure up and make that my primary diagnosis, I can do that. If I want to link or associate particular diagnoses with particular CPT codes, I can do that as well. There's always a section where I can write or type something in, just like they can write on a paper Superbill today. They can type notes into a electronic Superbill that other users downstream, whether that's in nurse or lab or x-ray or checkout, has access to this information as well. Anybody who touches the paper Superbill will probably need access to the electronic Superbill also. When I'm finished, I can say save and complete, or just save and close if I'm not quite done with it yet. It brings me back to my appointment screen. You'll see the status has changed to completed. And I can move on to the next encounter. All right, pretty simple. So far, so good. What I want to do is let's turn around and do that exact same encounter, but this time we'll do it in ICD-10. So I've set up this encounter to be an ICD-10 encounter. And what I want you to imagine is that I'm one of your providers. It's Thursday morning, October 1st. I have had very little training on ICD-10. And I'm going to come in and try to do my first encounter for the day. So again, a level 3 office visit and a cholesterol test. Nothing's changed there. The CPT codes are exactly the same. But what about the diagnosis tab? Is it 8 pages long, or does it look the same? You know, how does that work? It looks exactly the same as it did the day before. When I come in here and I'm going to click on cough, watch this. You'll see it highlights in green instead of yellow. That's the first indication that something is different. It converted that one automatically for me into ICD-10. Now, for most practices, somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 40% of the codes that they use most frequently can be converted automatically like that. They fit into that low-risk category. Well, let's go look at a more complex example, because you're certainly going to run into those. So let me scroll down, and we'll go to carpal tunnel. When I click on carpal tunnel, what you'll see is it cannot convert that for me automatically. So it gives me a pop-up and shows me my choices. For left arm, right arm, then unspecified arm. Now, that unspecified arm is a valid ICD-10 code. If you want to hover over that box, you can see the ICD-10 code and description. You could look it up in the code book. It's there. But that doesn't mean it's a good code to use. Many practices don't want to use unspecified ICD-10 codes like that because they're afraid that the claim won't get paid. Maybe it would get paid day one. Or maybe it'd take 3 months for Blue Cross to start denying those claims, or 12 months for Medicare to start denying those claims. But they don't want to start off with those types of bad habits. There is a configuration setting that clients can choose. Do you want to show those types of unspecified laterality codes or not? Just show the doctor 2 choices instead of 3. One extra click allows me to say it was in the right arm. You'll see it closes that pop-up window automatically, and it puts in the new ICD-10 code and description for me. Okay, if I wanted to go in and say, you know what, I didn't mean to click on that, let me unclick it, deselect. Oh, I need to select it again. Go ahead and get the pop-up. It brings it right back. One other thing to take note of here, if you had a patient that had carpal tunnel in both arms, there's not a single ICD-10 code for that. Many codes you'll see do have a bilateral option in ICD-10. This one does not. You would have to use both codes, 2 codes, one for the left arm, one for the right arm. So let me show you how to do that very quickly. I'm going to pin this in the top left-hand corner. That allows me to select more than one code. Since only one code is required, I'm going to pin it and then say OK when I'm done. And you'll see that it puts a little plus sign here on my encounter form. That lets me know there are multiple codes selected there. In this case, G56.02 and G56.01. That's how I would code bilateral carpal tunnel syndrome until they release a new ICD-10 code, which would probably be G56.03 to indicate bilateral carpal tunnel syndrome. All right, that's a moderate risk example. Let me scroll down and look at a high risk example as well. Let's look at congestive heart failure. If you'll remember, there are about 15 choices for this example. So again, it cannot convert that for me automatically. So what we've done in this pop-up, in this what we call a custom scenario, we've organized it for you so that you don't have to read through 15 different descriptions or drill down through multiple different choice lists to choose the right code. It's organized it for you where you have the type of heart failure here across the top, across the horizontal axis for systolic, diastolic, combined congestive heart failure. And then you have the onset here along the vertical axis. Is it acute? Is it chronic? Is it acute on chronic? One extra click allows me to say it's chronic diastolic congestive heart failure. Again, it closes the pop-up window for me automatically, puts in the new ICD-10 code, puts in the new ICD-10 description. Very similar to how they would handle it today in ICD-9. When I go to that rank and links tab, again, I can reorder my diagnosis codes if necessary, if you didn't click on them in the order that you wanted them. If your doctors don't do the linking, somebody can typically do that downstream for them. If the doctor's not doing it today, we don't want to introduce a new requirement for them to do that in the future. Another feature that a lot of our clients like on this particular screen is that it has the full ICD-10 description for them. So if they're still dictating, if they're still documenting their note on paper, they know where they need to be more specific. Instead of just writing CHF, or instead of saying congestive heart failure, it reminds them that they need to be more specific about the type of heart failure and about the onset. That they need to be more specific about which arm the carpal tunnel was in. They can view this on the screen. Some of our doctors have staff print this out for them so that they can come back and dictate at the end of the day. From a workflow perspective, we want to make this as similar to what they're doing today as possible. That's the key to making this successful for your providers, for making ICD-10 easy. Now, there may be things that you need to write in. I'll give you an example, like if you wanted to schedule a follow-up visit in 4 weeks. I can write that in, check out, can pull this up, can see that, schedule the follow-up visit for the patient. But again, sometimes there's a better way to do that. This particular group built this into their Superbill. Let me scroll down and show you. They've got a section for return visit that allows me to select a return visit and get a pop-up to say, what's the time frame? So I can say I need to see them back in 4 weeks. So I can do that in just 2 clicks, that I can communicate that easily to the front desk. So I don't have to type that out. If you have things that you're regularly using your Superbill to communicate, you may want to build that into the electronic Superbill rather than just having staff type that out every single time. Again, once I'm done, I can hit Save and Close or Save and Complete. It'll bring me back to that appointment selection screen, show me that those encounters are completed. You'll note that they changed the color to blue in the background. You've got control over that. You can choose the labels for the statuses. You can choose the colors, the font color, the background color. It's a nice workflow tool to be able to add in to what the practice does. Some of our providers like to say, you know what, I don't need to view anything that's already completed. If anything's in that status, just don't show it on my list. I'd rather that just drop off so that I know at the end of the day, if my list is empty, I've got everything done. Some billing managers or office managers really like that feature because they can see the outstanding Superbills. They think of it as a real-time missing ticket report. They can use to make sure they've captured all of the charges for the day, because an electronic Superbill can't walk out the front door with a patient. It makes it easier for them to manage that process. Those completed tickets are not gone. They were just hidden from my view. They're still right there. I can go back into those encounters. If I was a front desk employee, I'm checking out Mr. Lightyear. Say, Mr. Lightyear, thank you for coming in today. Was everything okay? Was there anything else that we need to do? Let me see if the doctor needed to see you back for a return visit. Yes, I do need to see you back in 4 weeks. Can we go ahead and get that on the schedule? Right? I've got all of that information right there for me. If I need to print them a copy of a receipt, they want to take a copy of the Superbill home, I can do that as well. So 9 times out of 10, whenever we get a workflow question about how do you do this with an electronic Superbill, the answer is it's very, very similar to how you do it with your paper Superbill. Okay, there are 2 more things that I want to show you in the application, and then I'll try to answer as many questions as I can. The first one is, how do I get patients onto my appointment list? There are 2 ways that that can work. If you use AccelaCAPTURE as a standalone application, then you can import a CSV file, which is basically an Excel file, if your practice management system can generate that, or if you can manipulate that report to get it into the right format. You can use that to import your patient and appointment lists. You can always have staff enter the patient names into the application so that the doctor can pick them off the list. 2 different solutions if you're using AccelaCAPTURE as a standalone. If you want to use AccelaCAPTURE with an HL7 interface from your practice management system, you can do that as well. That gives you a 3rd option where you should have appointment and demographic information coming from your practice management system to AccelaCAPTURE via an HL7 interface. Now, there are some additional costs associated with the HL7 interface, obviously. But AccelaCAPTURE as a standalone application will absolutely solve the Superbill problem for your physicians. The provider productivity problem that you should be focused on first can be solved with AccelaCAPTURE as a standalone application. Then, once you're done, at the end of the day, after all the charges have been completed, I can come up here to Reports, and this is more of a billing function. I'm going to go to the Encounter Charge Data Report and set my criteria. Do I want to print this report for all providers or only certain ones? all locations or only the Sharondale location? Everything from this week or only the encounters from today? I can do that and hit refresh, and you'll see all of those encounters from today. But you know what? I might only want to do the ones that are completed. Let me just do the completed encounters, and you'll see that filters my list down even further to just these two options. When I'm finished, and I'm going to run this report, I'm just going to click on the format that I want the report in. Do I want it in CSV or do I want it in Excel? I'll go ahead and open that up so that you can see it. And you get all the information that you need in order to key the charge into your practice management system. It gives me the CPT codes. It gives me the ICD-10 codes. If I had diagnosis codes that were not linked to a particular CPT code, it puts those there for me in the unlinked diagnosis, just in case your doctor forgot to do that. It's got the notes that I typed in there for me as well. So the workflow is very, very similar. Instead of using the paper Superbill, you're using the electronic Superbill to make sure that you can get to the right ICD-10 code. At the end of the day, you can print out this report. You can still key those into your practice management system, file your claims, run your balancing reports just like you do today. It's going to make that very, very similar. For small practices that have 10 providers or less, we would recommend starting with this. If you then want to add on other products, other functionality to help automate the code scrubbing, code review process, to automatically post the charge data into your practice management system. Those are things that we can help you with after October 1st, but we are too close to the October 1st cutover to have time to be able to cost effectively do that for a small practice today. So that's why we would recommend using AccelaCAPTURE 6.0. You can use that again as a standalone, or you can use that with the HL7 interface from your practice management system for appointment and demographic information. And then at the end of the day, you can print the encounter charge data report so that you can key those charges to your practice management system. We're trying to solve the big problem associated with ICD-10, right? How do I make it easy for my doctors? How do we make sure we get the right code the first time? An 8-page Superbill is not a good way to do that. As far as next steps, for those of you that are interested, we do offer a free 15-day trial of AccelaCAPTURE, where we will set it up with your custom electronic Superbill so that you can see how that works. You can see how it works in ICD-9. You can see how it works in ICD-10. You can show that to your providers. You can let them play around with it and make sure that that's going to be a good fit for your practice. That's the best way to find that out. So if you're interested in that, again, use the questions panel. Let me know. I'll make sure we have somebody from our trial team get in touch with you. There's just a few pieces of data that we need in order to get that set up for you, and we'll send you the training information, the training documentation, and support you during that time as well. There's no cost, there's no obligation, but if you think that might be a good solution for your practice, that would be my recommendation. AccelaCAPTURE as a standalone application, if you're going to use it in the standalone world, is licensed at $45 per provider per month. If you're using it with the interface from your scheduling system, it is $69 per provider per month. There are some setup costs that will depend upon the number of providers, how many Superbills you need, that sort of thing, and whether you're doing the HL7 interface or not. But I want to make sure we've got everybody at least in the ballpark of what we're talking about. So again, I would recommend starting with the free 15-day trial. and then making sure that that's a good fit for what you're trying to do. So I hope that that's helpful. I know I've covered information. I'm sure that there are questions that I did not answer, so I'm going to open up the questions panel, and I'll try to answer as many of